to save souls and run charity hospitals.
I don't put anything past the Vatican.
Probably a good tax write-off for them.
The Vatican teaches, through doctrine, the Vatican teaches that astrology is wicked, and yet they have got their hands so deep into astrology, it's just, you can't even believe it when you first find out.
Well, all astrology is a remnants of what was science many, many thousands of years ago, is all it is. It's become something else.
John, got a question for you. Do you believe that people will evacuate the Gulf states for whatever reason? Do you believe they will leave?
Well, there's a possibility right now that the methane gas from the BP spill, if it is from the BP spill, could cause evacuations to be done by the government. Whether people will self-evacuate, I doubt it.
Do you believe there will be an evacuation from the Gulf area?
That is a possibility. I've got some private source. I got some private sources telling me that the government's getting ready to conduct those evacuations.
See, now I'm of a different...
The economies will collapse once that occurs.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there won't be any economy. The Gulf Coast constitutes a measurable percentage of the American economy in general, probably 20% or so.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you believe the evacuation will the evacuation occur before the collapse of the economy or make the economy collapse, in your opinion?
Well, if they evacuate, that could collapse the economy. And would they take place before? I really don't know, Griff.
Do you look for the evacuation, though, in your mind? When you
I think there will be.
I
think there will be an evacuation of the Gulf Coast. Maybe not the whole Gulf Coast. The methane gas is really the biggest thing, putting everybody at risk down there. That'll come onto the dry land and kill a lot of people.
Did you hear today another Gulf oil rig exploded off of Louisiana?
Yeah, the last report I had on that was it appears to be no leakage of oil or gas, either one. It was a producing well. It was not a drilling rig.
The latest Alpha report said and talked extensively about the oil going back, the sealed oil well, if it is sealed, pumping oil and methane back into the land and coming up through other oil wells and sealed oil wells and getting into the water aquifers on the land.
Really?
Yes.
Well,
we had a well explode on land in Louisiana a couple of weeks ago, shooting oil 300 feet up into the air in a cornfield.
No kidding.
That was a good one. That was definitely great when that happened. No explanation. Oh, wait, that's right. They said a boat hit the wellhead.
No, that was another one.
Oh, that's right. That was totally
there was two of them. Right, there was two of them that happened.
So the situation in the Gulf is still very active, and you have millions of people living on the edge. Now, when those people evacuate, and they must at some point in time, whether government decree or will of the people, they're going to come in your direction, certainly to western Missouri. Did I say that right, Missouri?
Well, the
Missouri
natives
Missouri.
spoke it both. It depends on where you are in the state. And some say Missouri, some say Missouri.
Missouri. Do I get
credit?
But
the Katrina evacuation, none of them got as far north as what I am. A lot got into Arkansas, and of course northern Louisiana, but a lot came into Arkansas.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a different animal.
You know, where they'd end up in this next evacuation? They'll go with family and friends first. That could be anywhere. It could be Fargo, South Dakota, but they'll camp out with family and friends before they do anything else.
Right. Well, one thing I find interesting, and you spoke about, just the devastating effect that it would have on the already crippled economy, or let's just say terminal economy. Let's take, for example, the 9/11 attacks and what preceded the 9/11 attacks. I use this quite often on the radio show to show historical precedent about how they don't evacuate people out of an area when it can have a detrimental effect on an economy, and New York is a very good example because they knew before those towers came down about the amount of asbestos and other detrimental chemicals and particulates that were in that building that when it came down, it released it in the air. Yet the EPA, Christy Whitman, said the air's safe to breathe, we've got air monitors everywhere, and everything's fine. Now we roll ahead 10 years, and they're trying to pass legislation for what? Well, because all these first responders, everybody that stayed there, the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, they all have mesothelioma and respiratory illnesses because they stayed there when there was a problem, when it wasn't safe to breathe. So and why is that? Well, because they can't shut New York City down. What happens if they do that? You know what I mean?
You know what, Joe? This goes back to what, before I went to Afghanistan, it goes to what every friend of mine said. Those people are genuine heroes. They put their life on the line, but the unfortunate consequence for most heroes is death. And these guys, you know, it's just such a horrible situation. They didn't even know how bad it was.
Well, a friend of mine, a lady friend of mine, she has a search dog and went down to Hurricane Katrina. And she was sick for more than a year after getting back from the Hurricane Katrina devastation, and the dog was sick for about a year also, just being down there and breathing all that stuff from all the dead animals, dead people, and so forth.
Right. So, I mean, can you imagine what crude oil and dispersant is going to do to you with a prolonged exposure? I mean,
the Katrina contamination is still there. It's still in the soil,
sure.
And it's still measurable in the air. Now, if you have wind blowing off the Gulf, now you're doubling your lethal.
It's just a toxic mess that's down there, and you know, it speaks to the numbness of people where you have a situation. If their life is not directly impacted, and by that I mean they can wake up in the morning, they make their coffee, they go to work, they do their job, they come home, they take the kids to soccer practice, they watch their football. If it doesn't directly affect their life, then it doesn't even exist.
That's true.
It's not a threat.
That's true. That's the way most people act most of the time.
And that's where we are, and that's why you see such I want to say just a benign kind of lackluster response to it, when really, I mean, think about this. I'm enraged. I'm absolutely horrified at the whole thing, and I just see people just going about their daily lives down there, and I can't figure it out, because me as a person, as a free thinker, as somebody that chooses to see things for what they are and not what I want them to be, says that if it was me, I'm getting the hell out of Dodge. I don't care what kind of job I have. I'll go find another one.
Well, Joe, it's gotten to such an extent, you know, a third of Russia was on fire. Pakistan has had their worst disaster ever. And people still look at it and say, well, that stuff happens all the time. And they just dismiss it immediately.
Right. Well, the flooding in Pakistan, according to the United Nations, is worse than the Indian Ocean tsunami of 5 years ago.
Yeah, a quarter. I think they said a quarter of Pakistan is underwater at one point in time.
That's just so obscene. That's just the weather. That's not something they're used to. They have a rainy season, and that's it. This year they got, here's your flood. You know, they didn't get a rainy season.
Right.
So, John, how fast do you think these accelerated Earth changes are going to take place? Where do you see it getting to a point where, like a summit or a climax point, where it'll top out and then we'll start to recover? Do you see that happening?
Well, here's what I say. I think these things becoming more frequent and more violent. Not just weather, but also volcanism and seismic activity, becoming more frequent and more violent as the 10th planet gets deeper into our solar system and has a stronger gravitational, magnetic, and electrical effect on our Earth and on our Sun. At its closest point is when it will be most violent, going up and over. It comes from the bottom, goes up and over the top of the Sun, and it comes back down. When it comes back down on the other side, it may or may not be worse, depending on where we are at the time. And that whole period will take just a few months for it to swing up past us, go up over the top of the Sun, and swing back down, less than a year.
John, how do you attribute the lack of solar activity right now? Why do you feel like it's a calm before the storm?
Well, once again, I'm not the scientist, and I can't really comment with any scientific certainty as to why we're having unusually quiet with the sun. Although there has been some bizarre activity on the sun, it's been unusually quiet in terms of having sunspots and so forth.
Right.
We'll just take that as a temporary blessing and maybe a lull before the storm hits.
Right, because I think often I've rode out 3 or 4 hurricanes on a ship, and I can tell you that right before a hurricane hits, the sea is like glass. It's like glass, and when they say the calm before the storm, there is no calm before the storm like there is when you go out to evade a hurricane. And oh yeah, the sea is just totally flat, almost like you're looking into a puddle. And I often think about that when I think about the solar activity. And here we are, and you got NASA. NASA's coming out and they're saying, "Hey, guess what? There's going to be a lot of solar activity, and it could knock everything out."
Right,
and that's the way they're saying it, because it's all back channel. There's nothing overt and out front, but they are saying it. Get ready. Okay, so we're going to get ready. But
Joe,
what are we get ready?
I look into this solar stuff, and it's become hard to deny any of these things when we look at how much is coming. There's a theory I need to look more into, but essentially, to put it very simply, there's a theory that the planets are gravitationally winding up the magnetic pressure of the sun right now, and eventually it's going to get to such an extent that it's going to be like if you take a wind-up clock and you just keep winding and winding, eventually the spring explodes. And if his theory's right, and I'll get back to this later, there's going to be an exact date for the next big solar ejection in October.
Well, that's interesting to say the least. And one of the things that we'll do, John, is I'm going to try and get, if you can, shoot me the contact information of that. The scientist, I think, McCanning is his name?
Professor McCanning.
Professor McCanning, yeah. I would most certainly like to get him on for an interview and talk about this. Now, folks, the number to call if you have any questions, comments for John Moore or anybody here is 646-727-3387. That's 646-727-3387. John Moore's website, you can find it at thelibertyman.com. That's correct, right, John?
It is.
Okay,
thelibertyman.com. Right.
Okay,
right.
Very good. And lots of good information there. And anybody that hasn't seen John Moore's presentation on this subject matter, it's really a must-see. It gives you some very valuable information and a good way to communicate this information to other people that may have, let's just say, issues with trying to come to grips with reality.
Right.
Very good tools to be able to I hate to say market because it's such a bad word for it, but really that's what you're doing at this point, is trying to market this to people and sell them on it. And it's gotten down to that just because they're so dumbed down. And
it has.
Yeah.
It has. It's a lot of people have found this to be a very good tool to wake people up.
That's right. That's right.
I do have a toll-free number people can order my global warming DVD.
By all means, put it out, and that's wonderful.
Yeah, 800-592-9543. I say again, 800-592-9543. And the title of the DVD is Global Warming, What the Government Isn't Telling You.
And they certainly are not telling us. And, one of the things that I remember you saying in your presentation that people don't really think about, because in dealing with the government, there's a lot of botchery that goes on and there's a lot of mistakes, but they really can keep secrets, can't they?
Oh, they can. I used the example of the Manhattan Project. Over 100,000 men and women worked on the Manhattan Project during World War II to fabricate the first 2 atomic bombs. And very few of them, including my father and grandfather, almost none of them knew what they were doing. My dad and my grandfather were both plumbers working at Oak Ridge, Tennessee on the Manhattan Project. They didn't know until August 1945, after these things went off, what they were involved with. And it's called compartmentalization. That's the way the government keeps secrets. If you don't have a need to know, you don't know.